and order over chaos. Just saying, where have you heard that one before?
Welcome to the jungle. We got fun and game. We got everything you want. But we know the name. We are the people that survive. Whatever you may need. If you want the money, we got your need.
Welcome back. Welcome back. We're doing David versus Solomon. Oh boy, the L Conundrum, which is episode 3 in this series. Hi, and welcome to our Bible study channel.
Energy. 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 You cannot fuck with this. Energy. You cannot fuck with this energy. Love to do those in this session. All of those who are listening, don't miss the message, judging me. You cannot fuck with this energy. Energy.
These are videos that go pretty in depth. First thing you should probably do is pause and read our 12 rules for reading biblical text. And if you don't like the 12 rules or you don't understand the 12 rules, well, I don't have time to explain them all. Go back to the book that I wrote and uploaded on this channel, which takes you through the entire arc and how we made these quote unquote 12 rules as a framework of what we found after 7 years digging meticulously and carefully through the text. So if you're confused, go do that. If I refer back, well, that's probably because we actually post these things in order. So they're all done in series. And if you jump in at the middle of a series without any schema or background knowledge, and you get all pissed off, well, that's also not our problem. This is a group where we go line by line, scroll by scroll through the text. Warning, we are not language sensitive, so if you can't handle some cussing, it's not the place for you. We also do not endorse nor approve of pretty much any mainstream theology. So if you're looking for that, also definitely not the place for you. We do a video about the characters that we use in our Bible study series. And the reason we do this is sort of so that they can kind of get in your head. So we do have a video explaining why we chose the people we chose and how their sort of energy characteristics go along with the biblical characters to modernize it for people so they know what the heck we're reading. Clearly, the Roman Church was not doing their job and looking for the lost sheep of the reunited House of David. So that's what we're doing, okay? We're taking that away from them because they screwed it up. The brilliant rabbis also down there in Babylon are also not looking for the lost sheep of the reunited kingdom of David. So you're not going to hear, let's follow Rome. And you're not going to hear, let's follow the rabbis on this channel. Because, you know, sorry, not sorry, but the Bible wasn't actually written for the corrupt Levitical priesthood post-Babylon and Persia to read it through their little janky books. And it also wasn't written to be read through the eyes of pagan 4th century church fathers. So we're not doing that either. You guys can both have a seat. Oddly enough, the Bible also wasn't written to be read through the eyes of some dumbass scholars with pieces of paper that say they're smarter than everyone, but have never seen a Davidic covenant in their life. Not written for them either. You know who it's written for? It's written for the reunited house of David, who are actually in covenant and are actually the sheep. That's who it's written for. That's why nobody else can understand what the heck's going on. What you are going to hear is what you're supposed to hear, which is, let's follow the king. And let's get started.
So, we are going to war.
You guys, I say this all the time. Boy, is this a rabbit hole. Boy, is this a rabbit hole. So we actually have a mini agenda today. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to go down some scholars, a list of scholars. And as usual, I do not endorse theology nor the worldview in its entirety from any of these people. But we'll just go through, talk about the trust me, bro, scholars for a little bit, because we don't do trust me, bro. So we'll talk about the centrists a little bit. Today we're going to audit the Abraham files. Dun dun dun. We're going to take a look at the Phoenician letters MLK, and then the next time we'll get around to auditing the Jacob files. So we try to use a middle ground approach. And what I sort of mean by that is you've really got biblical understanding. I'm going to call it understanding. We take a literacy lens when it comes to the Bible. We look for patterns. We look at character. We look at motive. We look at text structures. We look at grammar and language and obvious editorial themes. We look at the history of the time period. We read it like you're supposed to read something, right? But the problem with muddling through and breaking down old schema and rebuilding new schema and enhancing our background knowledge is out there in the world. You've got two major camps, and we sort of call it the apologetics camp and the atheist camp, and the scholars sort of fall into that too. You've got your scholars who are funded by seminaries, so there's their bias, right? Anyone coming out of a seminary, religious institution, they have to sign the paper that says we will not say anything or follow any trails of research that go against our quote unquote statement of faith. Or they're funded by university donors who have a certain investment in the narrative going a certain way. Okay. You've also got, what we call pop culture scholars who say what their audience wants to hear. These are your Michael Heisers and your Bartermans who are out there hawking books and charging $15,000, $20,000, $25,000, $30,000 for a speaking engagement, right? They're not going to get up there and say the things that their sponsors, publishers, donors, and evangelical Christians or atheist groups don't want to hear. So they're catering to a specific audience. What they're not doing is catering to what the text says. Okay. They're not catering to history. And when an inconvenient data point comes up, rather than ask the implications of that data point, they excuse it, use apologetics to run in circles, or ignore it completely. So that's your apologetic side. They're being paid to make sure that the Jewish and Christian narratives do not fall apart. Okay, that's the first thing. The other side, you've got your atheist side. And these are your Gnostic guys and your Gnostic informant and, myth vision guys, and they're dead set on everything's false. It's all a Greek myth. The whole thing's bullshit and nothing is real. Both, and they'll come up with anything, any excuse and evidence that they can find to prove that, one thing is bullshit, then everything's bullshit. But that's also not reading the text, okay? So they're just hyper materialists. But both of them are working for their audience. They're both working for funders, donors, books, money, their podcast audience, whatever it is. They've got an agenda, and they're two opposite sides of the same coin. And what that coin is they're not actually reading the Bible. Even a lot of your scholars, they're trained to, read 500 pages on one book or one piece of one book or one aspect of something, but they're not looking at archaeology, history, language, empire motive, all the things, textual seams, patterns through the Bible. They're not trained to look at it. They're trained to look at the trees, not the forest. And they're all in little silos, which is why it seems so absurd. But that's how the scholars, that's how their schooling is done. Like they're dumbed down. Right? They spend more time reading what other people have said about what the Bible says than just using 5th grade literacy and reading the freaking text. Like they don't do that. Okay, reading the story, they don't do that. And it's been designed that way. So those are kind of the two sides that you're constantly battling out there when you're trying to get decent information. And it doesn't work. It doesn't work. So there is actually a middle ground, and I want to introduce you to the middle ground, not because I think that this is a group to run out and join, or that anyone on this list has the whole picture or has the answer or is someone to follow. Okay. But just know that it's, in mainstream archaeology and any kind of biblical studies, it's sort of known as this centrist scholarship. And this is getting more popular, and they're rejecting both extreme biblical minimalism, which is like, it's all fake. The whole thing is a Persian or Hellenistic invention. Okay. The whole thing's made up. They just made it up. Everything. And that's one side. And then that's extreme minimalism. And then you've also got your, confessional maximalism. And this is the traditional seminary view. And it takes everything literally, and nothing could possibly be edited. And it's God's word that fell down from his lap into Moses's lap. And it works with apologetics, not data. And apologetics is really where a lot of people get trapped. A lot of channels out there, a good example is people who discover Paul's false. They spend the rest of their life, that Paul's false, using apologetics to prove that Paul's false. It's like, guys, there's more. There's so much more. And that's the trap apologetics gets you into. But I think Christians in the West have been so trained in apologetic arguments that they get down to the minutia, all right, down to the minutia of one siloed issue. And that's the same problem that the scholars have, is that they're just hyper-focused on one little detail, and they'll never pull the whole thing together. Nobody can. There needs to be more people. There needs to be more people out there looking at these things, and not just one or two little spaces of it. So here's some people that you may have heard of or may not have heard of. We heard of Israel Finkelstein. What his whole argument is that David was actually real. He was a 10th century BC outlaw and a warlord. We agree. And he ruled this rustic, sparsely populated chiefdom, if you will. And we agree. Okay, we agree on that point. But he also views Solomon as this transition to assimilating with the institution. We sort of agree to that. But the biblical golden age of Solomon's trade palaces actually belongs to the 9th century Omride dynasty of the northern kingdom of Israel. And they later consolidated and merged the northern Israel achievements into the southern figure of Solomon to sort of create this unified myth. That's his view. Okay, so if you want to read, it's just really interesting to read these guys and some of their arguments and things that they come up with. Another one is, second one that we want to point out is William Dever. And I don't know why I have numbers here. Like my slide deck numbered it. I don't really want it numbered because these are in no particular order, right? This isn't like our most popular to least popular or anything like that. They're just really random. But this guy's really elite, and he's a Near East archaeologist. And what he's sort of doing is he's waging this intellectual warfare on this minimalists who say the whole thing's fake. But he's also refusing to cater to the fundamentalist seminary guys. So one of the books he wrote is What Did the Biblical Writers Know and When Did They Know It? And he argues for sort of this convergence model. And he's talking about it in an archaeological way. He says archaeology proves that a state-level administration did indeed exist in David's time, validating the existence of a monarchy. He agrees that David was a historical figure of some sort, and he was a charismatic, aggressive warlord type, and he consolidated power through force and loyalty. And he views Solomon as a bureaucrat who normalized the state, built a palace temple complex, and integrated Israel into the broader Hittite and Phoenician economic system. So he was our great assimilator once again. Who else do we have to kind of take a look at? Mario Liverani. This guy's at the University of Rome, and he is he's very, very well known Italian historian of the ancient Near East. One of his books that you can check out is Israel's History and the History of Israel. And it provides a secular middle path, secular. So, nobody's talking about the Davidic Covenant and any of these people. They're just talking about the archaeology and history around this topic. And he sort of splits Israel and their history into normal history, which is what archaeology can actually prove, and invented history, which is the mythos and the legends, and also the rewrites and the theological narratives that get dumped on top of that. So he kind of splits those into two. And he also says David's a warlord doing a small scale system in a Highland society. And Solomon is this elite, sort of a client ruler, if you will, like our client kings we talked about. And mimicking the admin, architectural, and tax collecting behaviors of Syrian and Phoenician states. So sort of adopting that stuff down into the area and legalizing and institutionalizing the conquest of David into the larger northern states. That's how he sees it. Baruch Halpern, he's down in Georgia. He's a pretty respected historian. And he wrote David's Secret Demons, Messiah, Murder, Traitor, King. And he sort of uses this critical historical method to strip away any later biblical whitewashing. And the text itself leaves scars or seams of truth because the authors had to defend against historical rumors. So he sort of sees David as this brutal warlord who ran a protection racket for the Philistines, murdered his rivals, and ruled a small local chiefdom. And the sprawling, wealthy empire that's later attributed to Solomon is actually just made up. So David's real, but Solomon's not. It's sort of a literary expansion, or at least all of the wealth and legends associated with him is. But it's based on an administrative shift, okay, of making that part of the state and absorbing that into the top-down method, if you will, to centralizing all that wealth in Jerusalem. They use Solomon to do that. Lester Gray, let's see. Okay, this guy organized European seminars in historical methodology, and he has these conferences, okay? And he's forcing your biblical minimalists, quote unquote, and maximalists, quote unquote, all into the same room. He operates in the centrist camp, and he thinks the biblical text is a really problematic source, but it does retain authentic core historical memories all the way back to the Iron Age. People don't understand oral history and how important it is, because the oral history is often well respected when they want to run around and interview Native Americans, in Central America about their opinions on the Nephilim, because that gets really great headlines, right? This dumbass who runs around down in the Amazon. Well, the ancient mysteries of the pyramid people in South America when I was on my way in my adventures and hiking around, whatever, dude. They were giant people, and we interview, you know, that guy who I'm talking about? Who the hell is that guy? He was like, ugh.
About 5 or 6 years ago, I hitchhiked here and ended up stuck out in the middle of this place. Climbed up out of the freeway. This little old black man comes up to me and my friend with our backpacks and about $10 between us.
Yeah, he's like trying to be like James Bond, right? But he's like this goofy looking millennial. And like, I mean, like, I don't want to talk shit about people. I feel like I'm from a different generation, man. Like, that guy would get beat up. Like, I'm not seeing him, you know, waging through the Amazon with like some freaking machete. I'm sorry, but I actually lived in Peru back in the day, and like, I don't think that guy would last 10 minutes without his hair gel. I'm just saying.
And he goes,
You know where you are? You in the jungle, baby! You're gonna die! That's a true story, that ain't no lie!
I don't find him credible. Let's just say that. To find the Nephilim. I'm sorry. I don't know who that guy is. Someone's gonna have to tell me who the heck I'm thinking of. And they're talking about something you want to hear. Well, then oral tradition's important. But when it comes to the Hebrew history, oral tradition, they don't want to hear about that. You know, he really accepts that David is this charismatic tribal warlord. And Solomon is the vehicle, the literary vehicle, quote unquote, used by later writers to push the institutionalized realities of the later era. And they kind of mix the two, which is what we're saying. You have to separate the Solomon and Davidic narrative because they're not the same. We've got a couple more here that you can look into. We've got Don Levinson, and he's at Harvard. He's got the death and resurrection of the beloved son. And this is just showing that the firstborn child sacrifice law that we'll be talking about in this session and the next upcoming sessions was actually the original, literal, legal foundation of the Levant, including Israel. Okay? Mark Smith over at Princeton, The Early History of God. He shows, which we're going to talk a little about today, that Moloch, this demon or this other god named Moloch, is not really a god at all. It's a linguistic fabrication. Once again, those Germans in the 19th century and earlier. I mean, that's not entirely fair, right? The vowel maker-uppers will say, okay? It was designed to protect the reputation of El, who was the actual recipient of the firstborn blood rights. So we'll get into that. What they're saying is they mess with the vowels like we did in the We the People game that we played a little while ago with Hebrew Gurnt language. I've been saying for years, guys, all you have to do is switch some vowels. All you have to do is switch some vowels around. And you can change history if you're listening to these damn Masoretic text people. I'm telling you, it's Greek. But when they mess with those vowels, they changed the word. And they're like, yeah, that's a false god named Moloch. When really it wasn't. It was, I call it a verb. It's like the act of sacrificing. Okay. Moloch is the act of sacrifice. But it's also a noun to describe the act of sacrifice, if that makes sense. Like we're going to go Moloch our kid today, right? Yeah. It's a tribute to the king or the god that is seen as the king is what Moloch means. Okay, but they mess with the vowels there. And Mark Smith at Princeton shows you that. Dr. John Day over at Oxford. This is Yahweh and the gods and goddesses of Canaan. This guy talks about how El Elyon was the pre-existing native Jebusite banking cartel god of Jerusalem, whose infrastructure was totally hijacked or absorbed by Solomon's scribes to build the centralized, money-hungry, child-eating state god. And this is the banking god before Jerusalem was a thing, right? We're talking back when it was Salem, back when it was under the Jebusites, before Solomon moved into Jerusalem and assimilated all of that. And then we've got Dr. Heath Durrell. I never say that name right. Dr. Heath Durrell. And from him, you can read Child Sacrifice in Ancient Israel. Let me go back. And what he's really focused on here is Ezekiel 20. We're not going to focus on Ezekiel 20. We're going to mention it for like 12 seconds and keep it moving. But he forensically audits this, proving that the text explicitly says, okay, that the deity used child sacrifice laws to entrap and break down the population. And that's straight up auditing just from Ezekiel 20. Okay, we're going to stop there on our scholars, but we'll add some more in the next time. Just to show you that we're not just making it up, guys. We're not just making it up. What we're doing is we're noticing these same things that the centrist scholars are talking about, but we're noticing it from reading specialist lens, looking at the text critically and following those themes, rather than historical stuff. Okay. So, but just know we're not the only crazy ones. These things that the scholars are saying is what the text actually says too, if anybody read it. Okay. So we're going through this by just reading it. And we will be auditing the Abraham file today. So let's get started. Now, we've also got sort of a 2-track audit going on here. And track number 1 would be Moses, Aaron, and the Levite priesthood group. And then we've also got the Abraham Jacob audit going. And right now, we're just working on the Abraham Jacob audit, which is plenty. But you can't understand the New Testament until you understand the Old Testament. And what so many people do, so many Christians do, in their search for quote unquote truth, is they're reading the Bible backwards. Okay. They start with Paul and work their way backwards through the Gospels and the letters and then continue on. And then they pull from the Old Testament, and sort of cherry pick their way through these stories in order to justify whatever theology they've picked up from reading the end of the book before they read the beginning of the book, which doesn't work that way. Like, you can't do that. But that's the lens that so many Christians are stuck in. They are stuck in the New Testament lens. First, before they understand the setting, the politics, the people, the places, and the history of the ancient Near East. And you can't do that. You can't do that. You can't do that. You can't work backwards. So we already have seen, right? We have a split voice with Moses. We've got that split jurisdiction. So we have to audit that a lot more carefully in the future and see where exactly did this split happen and which is under which jurisdiction and where did this all go wrong on that road trip from hell, and or before and or after. And also the Aaron and Levite issue. We've talked about that several times before. But for right now, we're just focusing on Abraham and Jacob, and we've got plenty to do on that track. However, if you want something to chew on, back to Stephen and his speech again, right before he's stoned by the elites, of which Paul was one. What he's doing, and he's actually got, we've broken this down for our future whenever we talk about Stephen. We have Stephen's speech broken down into 4 different sections. And he's doing what Jesus does. And he's doing what James does so often, which is using their own corrupted books against them. Jeremiah, lying pen of the scribes. They knew it was corrupted, right? They're tearing down the whole system, the whole Solomonic system. They're going after it. So they know, they understand the rewrites. They understand the edits. They understand the tax debt slaveness of the centralized religion. So very often they're using their own stories against them. They're using their own words against them. But you don't understand that if you don't understand the Old Testament and the seams and the mixed jurisdictions and the differing encounters of the patriarchs to begin with. If you're seeing it for a Pauline or a, Catholic-based, Protestant-based, evangelical-based lens, from our pagan Greek church fathers, or you're seeing it from a Second Temple, Persian-era rabbi lens, you're missing everything that came before. Those rewrites, that spin. You're not getting the whole story because they're selling it to you as this one giant cohesive story where everyone was great, nobody made mistakes, and it was all fine. And then just one God all the way through. And he did everything with a completely horrendous, violent, and schizophrenic personality. And that's what you're supposed to believe. And they can't tear it down because it tears apart the entire Christian and Jewish identity. But we're not going backwards. I mean, we sort of are, right? But we go back a lot. So good old Stephen, he actually does 4 different sections of arguments about the history. And he's using their own corrupted stories against them to prove his point in his rhetoric. So one of the things he does that people completely miss is he's explicitly quoting the prophet Amos here, okay? And he's telling them that the wilderness generation, or what I lovingly call it, the road trip from hell people out in the wilderness with Moses, that generation, he explicitly quotes Amos and says, they made idols and God gave them up. God gave them up, abandoned them, let them go to worship the quote unquote host of heaven or the star gods. And then he completely drops the hammer on Solomon. Now, he also points to Moses, and we mean the second voice Moses jurisdiction, not the first voice Moses jurisdiction, 2 jurisdictions, okay? But see, he kind of gives Moses a little slam, the Levite Moses, if you will. And he says, well, Moses made the tabernacle carrying around these star gods. But it was Solomon who built a house for God. However, or built a house for him, excuse me. However, the Most High does not dwell in houses made by human hands. People jump right over that. What are you saying, Stephen? Well, I'm quoting Amos. Well, what was Amos saying? Amos is saying, God's not in your temple to begin with. All the way back to Solomon, there was a split. As a matter of fact, there was a split in the desert. On the road trip from hell, there was a split. And you guys are doing it wrong. That's what your prophets are. They're just running around yelling at everyone that they're doing it wrong and why. They're not predicting events 3,000 years in the future. They're running to the leaders and the people saying, you're doing it wrong and here's why. You're fucked and here's why. That's what they're doing. So Stephen is quoting Amos, accusing this whole Solomonic system as being invalid to begin with, which is exactly what we've been saying. So let's move a little bit further. I tell you, once we just getting through Stephen and what he's doing here is so heavy. It's so heavy and it's so missed. Let's get this out of the way. For the letters that make up the word L, E-L, okay, the graphemic root is an aleph, which is a pictograph of an ox head, and it represents muscular force, like that raw primal force, leadership, and power. And then the next letter, the L, if you will, is a pictograph of a shepherd's staff, and it represents authority, direction, control, and most interestingly, binding legal jurisdiction. So when you smash these two pictographs together into a vocalized L, what the word means is binding force of top-down control. Not just one L, just like there's not one Baal and there's not one Yahweh. There are multiple layers of each deity, and it changes across geography and across time. So it's not one figure. It's sort of this category, if you will, of high gods that you see across the Levant. And they change slightly depending on language, culture, background. You know, I always say this about the Baals, right? The scholars are always running around saying, well, that's this Baal, not that Baal. And I'm like, okay, but it's the same thing. No, it's not the same thing, because the Baal over here is about harvest and rain, and the Baal over here is about livestock and rain. And I'm like, well, that's because the people over there are farmers and the people over here are herdsmen. And, you know, regardless, you can't sell ice to Eskimos, right? So you're not going to have a crops geography Baal, you know, and they're like, oh, let's worship this Baal for, you know, herding. Well, there's no herding there. So they're worshiping them for crops. Meanwhile, the herdsmen are worshiping them for herding. But your dipshit scholars are like, no, this is the god of herding in storms, and this is the Baal of crops and storms. I'm like, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. Different names, you know, different names, different geography, different times. But essentially, it's a category of deities. Does that make sense? So it's this one's not exactly that one, and that one's not exactly this one. But like we said before, it's fucking all the same. They're categories of deities. So we've got the Ugaritic El, who's the father of gods, the Canaanite El Elyon, who's the most high, the Jebusite El Elyon from Jerusalem, the northern Israelite El from Bethel and Shechem. These are not identical entities, but they rhyme, and they rhyme a lot because it's a category of understanding of the way the cultures understood, quote unquote, their God. Because El is this classification of power, like the quote unquote most high power, within that pantheon, it requires these descriptive titles that are attached to El so that people understand the specific jurisdiction of the corporate CEO, if you will. It doesn't mean creator or most high on its own. It needs qualifiers. So El is sort of our base unit of the language or of the word. And El is the high patriarch of the pantheon of gods. And it was named El because he was sort of the personification of the ultimate grandfatherly source of binding authority over the divine council. And now that you hear the word divine council associated with El, you see where Heiser gets his ideas from. He took the El pantheon and slapped Yahweh's name onto it because he's post-Persian evangelical. Persia in the Second Temple Judaism is the original, according to evangelicals. That's the be-all, end-all. We've got to love our Jewish friends and kiss their ass with their rewrites just as much as we kiss Rome's ass with their rewrites. So Heiser takes really basically the El pantheon and slaps Yahweh's name on it because, well, that was Persia's slap. They slapped Yahweh's name on it. So he keeps that going. But he's really talking about El, not the southern Edomite Yahweh. So we've got several profiles of deities going on, and there's way more than this. Like, we didn't even put Ishtar in here. We don't have Tammuz. There's a whole lot of shit we didn't put in the deck today. But for our purposes, as to where we are right now, I think we're just going to do 5. So we've got Jesus's father, who we often call David's God. Okay. Because if Jesus is the son of David, he doesn't call himself Israel. He doesn't call himself the son of Solomon. He doesn't call himself the son of the Jews. He calls himself the son of David. So if he's inheriting those contracts and he's that heir, that patriarchal heir, then David's God must be the same God as Jesus's God. And this is something that people don't want to admit. Your scholars are like, oh, David worshipped Yahweh. Really? So you're telling me that Jesus's God is a southern storm deity from Edom? I don't think so. I don't think so. Doesn't fit. And this is a relational, sort of kinsman relationship. It's open air. It's non-transactional. He's interacting directly with the people. He meets under tents and caves. He operates on trust, loyalty, shared hospitality. There's no blood rituals, no taxes, no flesh branding with this God. Then we've got profile B, which is El Elyon. This is our sky landlord, if you will. High altitude and very detached from the people. This guy doesn't get his hands dirty. He's got other people around him. He's got his other guys that go out and do stuff for him. This is your mob boss with the cosmic hitman profile that Heiser loves to push. He operates through these city-state brokers like the Jebusites. He demands structural submission, tithing or rent, and property taxes, which is your first fruit child sacrifice. So when James is speaking of first fruits and Paul is speaking of first fruits, we've got two different first fruits going on here, okay? The ultimate property tax of the child sacrifice is this guy's first fruit. But he rarely comes out of his corner office to get his hands dirty. Oh, no. No. He's got a whole corporation working with him. Which brings us to profile C. This is the God of the covenant, and he's in charge of terms and conditions. Okay, where El Elyon was more like your international central banker. Well, El Berith is more of your CEO. He's in charge of the terms and conditions of the contracts. He's actually called the God of the contract. And this is your closer. He's attached to the commercial hubs like Shechem, Bethel, and he only and ever speaks in quid pro quo language. If you do this, then I'll do this. If I give you this, you give me that. He uses bureaucratic transit grids and legal ledgers. He never forgets. And we've got our next profile. Profile D is our El Shaddai. This is sort of like the repo man or the hitman down on the ground. He's sort of kind of like the Reshef types, the enforcer types. And this guy, you don't want to meet him in a dark alley. He is the enforcer, if you will. And he'll ambush you in the dark, breaks boundaries, shatters hips, Jacob looking at you, and demands physical, bloody marks on the body. Perhaps circumcision, perhaps something else, to enforce compliance. He's our compliance enforcer. And you guys are used to that enforcer type. And then we've got our Baals and Yahwehs are sort of the same. The Baals kind of really get mixed in with these eventually, but we've got our Kaus kind of God, which is our desert blood syndicate. This is our vital, elemental, extraction heavy. This is blood ransom, debt penalties, slavery, debt slavery, and lots of fire and smoke manifestations. It was the god of smelting. So it's very volcanic. It's very metallurgy, and all of those things are associated with this guy, the Yahweh of the South. There is a difference. I'm always saying the Edomite God, the Edomite God, the Edomite God is Yahweh. Well, I know. There's a difference between the Edomite house and the Midianite Baal, okay, that did the blood ritual with Zipporah. They are different, sort of. Okay. One of them is our Edomite, one is Kos, and our Midianite Baal is Baal Peor, that the Levites get busted making a deal with. But functionally, they're the same. They've got different titles, but they're pretty much the same thing. And we will see that eventually when we go back and audit more of the Moses Levite patriarchs. Not so important here with the Abraham Jacob piece. But because we did talk about the Yahweh thing last time, I wanted to throw that in. There is a slight difference between these two, but not a lot. Not too much. So El, quote unquote, he's not a southern god like the Yahweh down south. It's the title of this high god type deity. And he's worshipped in the north, in Phoenicia, in Ugarit, and Jebusite stronghold of Jerusalem, also known as Salem. Okay. And he's the most high, not meaning creator of the entire universe, just simply the most high of the pantheon of gods. Think of your Greek gods, Zeus, old guy with a beard. And this is the personality that a lot of people like. But not so fast. Not so fast. He's got boundaries, and he's like your elder, right? He's got a consort who's the mother of the gods. It's a stabilizing force of the quote unquote family. We've got many children, Baal types, Mot types, and these are sovereign gods, each with their own domain, each with their own territory, and each with their own people. This is the ancient Near East view. We've also got extended household with messengers, craftsmen, warriors. Again, not the cosmology of angels and demons. That comes in with Persia. They're gods. They're other gods and have their own cha-cha going on. And the reason this maps to be, I want you to think of Greek system, the Greek gods, and you'll get it. And the reason the ancient Near East feels Greek when you think about it, and it'll help you get your head around it, take your head out of biblical text and put your head mapping it to the Greeks, is because we've got a high god and a consort, this family with their own, each with their own domain. We've got this assembly on Mount Olympus, a presiding elder, different jurisdictions. But the ancient Near East is older than Greece. It's older than Israel. It's older than Ugarit, and it's older than Canaan. So the Greeks, this was here first, and the Greeks just Hellenized it into their own system. So this is like your pre-Greek. And if you think of it like the Greek gods you learned about in 4th grade, you get the idea. Now, El Elyon is also known as El Olam, and he's the top of this pantheon. He's not a storm god, okay? This is where your Baals and Els and Yahwehs will all mash up later. But and he's not a war god. He's not a local jurisdictional deity. He's the cosmic patriarch. He's the leader above the other beings in this pantheon or group of gods. They've got this divine council. And this is El, not Yahweh. Looking at you, Heiser. We've got lesser gods, lesser spirits, messengers, enforcers, your Hadad Reshef types. But it's a structured, bureaucratic cosmos. They prefer harmony over conflict and order over chaos. Just saying, where have you heard that one before?
Welcome to the jungle. We got fun and game. We got everything you want. Running with all the day. We are the people that fly. Whatever you may need. If you want the money, hell, we got your disease in the jungle. Welcome to the jungle. What can we do? I want to watch you bleed.
So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the Jebusite El profile. Okay, these are the folks in Jerusalem before Jerusalem was Jerusalem. Okay, this king of the pantheon doesn't mean he's a nice guy. It just meant that he's got the title, the supreme title to the legal property deeds. So This guy's urban, administrative, and territorial. He's bound to a city-state, and he is not a trust me, bro, God at all. He operates on tribute. He operates on boundaries of the earth and the land. He demands permanent central banking house or a temple because his job, his goal is to funnel all the physical wealth and energy of the earth into this centralized treasury. Okay. And this is run by your priests, which is your Zadok priesthood, your Zadokites that get sucked right in. So L is really attached to everything because he wants to have his little trademark stamp on everything and everyone. So in ancient naming conventions, right, we've got names like Samuel, Daniel, Ezekiel, Michael, and of course, Israel. Uh-oh. And so why did they stamp this specific syllable onto everything? Well, in the ancient Near East, we're dealing with jurisdictional cosmology. And naming something is the act of owning and foreclosing on something legally. So if a king or a god stamps you with his name or a city or a piece of land, it's legally claimed that asset as his private property. It's his spot, and you're paying rent or taxes. So stamping the name is like a trademark or a logo or literally a livestock brand. Okay, it's a tag. And it's signaling to the spiritual material world, this asset belongs to the jurisdiction of the high God pantheon system. His life, the womb of the women, the fertility, the production are legally owned under this corporation. Think of it like that. This is why Israel is the ultimate structural trap. It literally means L strives or L rules. It locks the entire population identity directly into this legal conglomerate network of the corporate brand head. So, El Elyon is the El who is most, or El Elam, the one who is the most high of the pantheon. It's a specific title. It's kind of like the apex predator or the supreme territorial ruler. And this belongs exclusively to the Jebusite elite of Jerusalem, which brings in Melchizedek and the Zadokite priesthood. It signifies that this is the God at the tip of the pyramid, of the city-state banking and real estate pyramid. So many people are out there, right, making shit up about Melchizedek. But we're going to see how we meet him and what's happening. Oh, he's more important than Abraham because Abraham bows down to him and gives him a tenth of his shit. Well, why is he giving him a tenth of his shit? Because he's paying tribute. It's the tax. It's the corporate tax he's got to pay for passing through the land. Okay? So this whole idea of, Jesus is a priest in the order of Melchizedek, this is coming from Hebrews, which is why I said a long time ago, I forgot where we were, but I said, I talked about that in Hebrews, but that's a whole nother cha-cha. Okay, we're going to put Hebrews to the side for a minute, because now that we're starting to understand, we have to read biblical texts through the factions that authored them, or the political and geopolitical stuff, economic stuff going on at the time. We've got to identify the faction behind the book. So already, talking about the order of Melchizedek, we've got a clue here about who wrote Hebrews, what faction of people may have penned the book of Hebrews, when they're referring it all the way back to Melchizedek, who is a Jebusite priest who is taxing Abraham. Oh, it's a whole different way to look at it, isn't it? Now, to be fair, in the Gospels and in Acts, they refer back to Psalm 110, because in there it talks about Melchizedek as well. Okay. And you see this in Acts with Peter, and you see this in the Gospels too. But it doesn't use the word Melchizedek. They stop short before they get to that line in Psalm 110. And that's important. It's just as important what they don't say as what they do say. Okay. But we're going to put a pin in Psalm 110 because that's something we have to break down when we go back into our resurrection series and sort of dig through Peter and what the heck he's talking about over there in Acts when he refers to Psalm 110. So, but just put a pin in that. There's a little Melchizedek nugget for you. Put a pin in that one. That's one of those that goes deep, and we're coming back to that eventually. Down the road, kicking that can down the road for a minute. And let's stay focused right here at the Jebusite El profile, of which Melchizedek was the high priest of. Okay. They were bound to urban banking centers in Jebus, which is pre-Jerusalem. They operate on top-down real estate, vassal treaties, and monopolies. They're extracting wealth, and they're extracting human collateral. This God does not offer a free handshake. He demands an institutional house or a temple to run international trade, tithes, and land control contracts. That's what this guy's about. There's your Melchizedek God. So you can start to see the trap that's being laid here for the sons of Abraham and why El is guilty. So when you analyze the narrative in the textual story, the plot line, the characters, the setting, through this specific factional lens, the innocent El myth completely disintegrates. So the story of the patriarchs is not this one monolithic God and group of people all the way back. You've got this loop of men who are encountering different entities, receiving a direct glimpse of the true Davidic Covenant God, and then immediately screwing it up by defaulting back to ancient Near East legal programming. And tell me you cannot understand this, okay? People coming out of Protestantism or evangelicism or anything, they come out of one piece, and then they sort of get a glimpse, and then they run back to join a group. Well, I need to be with people that think like me. I need a denomination. I need someone to tell me what to do. And they immediately run to the rabbis, or they run to Hebrew roots, or they run to a different denomination, or they go home to Mother Rome and rejoin the Catholic. They do whatever they do. They're looking for a specific faction to identify with. Well, it's the same thing. It's human behavior, okay? When we talked about the sacrifice, how it was just the law of the land, right? All these sacrifices going on. It was like the DMV law, remember? I mean, if you're surrounded with this, it's not easy to just bust out of. So let's cut them some slack here because they're going right back to their programming. Our premise is that the God, quote unquote, that 99% of Western civilization is worshiping evokes in occult rituals or reads about in theology books is the Solomonic corporate deity, not the Davidic one, not the Jesus one. It's a composite monster of Solomonic real estate, borders, blood sprinkling, and financial debt. Now, Jesus, James, and the prophets, all the prophets who were murdered, are trying the whole time through the entire story to point right back to the nameless presence and starlight of the tent of David, the one that exists entirely outside the matrix of the Solomonic temple and banking system and top-down pyramid structure. But nobody's understanding what they're doing. And certainly, the people aligned with that top-down structure do not want anybody listening to the king. That's not what they want because their whole system fails. So one way to look at this El problem, you've probably seen this, okay? This El Elyon and El Bereth, when they're working together here, our contract architects, right? Our international banker and our contract guy. They're going to catch you in your dreams or at the city gate. They might give you bread and wine and offer free trade agreements. They get you to sign contracts, promising future real estate in exchange for 10% in compliance. So how you kind of look at this L problem is it's this major top-down corporate entity. Like, look at this, right? We've got all these L's and they all own all of these products out on the street, right? You've seen this before where there's Coca-Cola and Mars and Procter & Gamble and Nestle, and they own all the same shit. It's like the illusion of choice, but it's all getting sucked up to these few corporations, these few entities within this giant structure of control. So that's kind of this level of the L's. But let's zoom in a little further and let's just look at Nestle. Okay, this would be your Elohim board of directors, if you will, or the enforcement wing, the El Shaddai. These are the guys on the street. Okay, and the moment you try to run off their grid or dig an independent well or raise an heir outside of their corporate lineage, they're going to arrive as the enforcer and the repo man. And they snap Jacob's hip in the dark. They demand a knife to your flesh. They demand your firstborn child to prove to you who holds the master lease. So this is sort of like your Nestle, where you have the illusion of choice, but basically the Kit Kat and the Crunch Bar, pick anyone you want. It all goes to us. Does that make sense? You can choose Nescafe or Taster's Choice. They've got different names. But at the end of the day, it's all going back to us. That's sort of your on the street El Shaddai wing of this whole conglomerate. So Melchizedek's Jebusite El Elyon, this was the original god of Jerusalem before it was Jerusalem. This is the quote-unquote most high god of the pantheon that Melchizedek served. And the Zadokite priesthood comes directly from here. Alas, we have another faction, and they're not all just one long line of people, all following the same God, and they just bumped into each other in the desert. That's not the story. So El Shaddai, this is the raw rural entity that controls the wilderness. And interestingly, Stara, looking at you, he controls the biological opening and closing of the womb. Albereth is our legal and bond covenant. He specializes in binding human clans and lineages to strict political contracts. He's also known as Baal Bereth, and he's associated with storms and weather, sort of like that storm god Biles, because he's a manifestation of the Baal type. So they sort of overlap here. We're going to see that two things you can't escape, death and taxes. Well, we're going to see that with Abraham today. And the trap laid for Abraham and the sons of Abraham, and why we think El is the guilty party. So we're going to take a look through, we're going to take a walk through 12, 13, 14, 15, 17, 18, and 22. And we're going to look at the times when Abraham met a God and try to see if using those profiles that we laid out, if we can identify who he's talking to where. And if we can't identify exactly, well, at least we know the category of deity that he's dealing with. So in Genesis 12, 1 through 3, this is going to, we're going to tag this right out of the gate as profile A. That's our David God, our relational kinsman, because he's completely off grid. It's a non-transactional interaction, personal protection with no strings attached. And then 12 through 6, he shows up again with an open air land grant. Okay, under the oak tree, it's a pure, unmediated promise with zero tax grids and zero flesh cutting and sacrifice. So let's jump over to Genesis 12, and share this tab instead. Okay, so here in Genesis 12, now the Lord said to Abram, go from your country, put a pin in which country he is going and coming from. We learned when we broke down and found the two voices in Genesis 15, which is a few chapters later than this, right? That he came from the north. And he's like, I remember the Aram area. He's like, I don't know. I don't have any descendants up there, right? Remember that whole thing? We already broke down 15. Well, this seems to match the account in the first 6 verses of Genesis 15. The Lord said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. I'll make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. And I'll bless those who bless you. And to him who dishonors you, I'll curse, and in all the families of the earth shall be blessed. He is not speaking to Israel. Israel doesn't exist yet. As a matter of fact, Israel is Jacob, and Jacob's not even born yet. So this is to Abram. He has not even changed his name to Abraham yet. Never mind Israel. Okay. So the blessing, cursing of Israel thing, it's not. It's Abram right here. So Abram went as the Lord told him. Lot went with him. Sounds very much like Genesis 15. But here we are back in 12. Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran, Haran. Now, put a pin in Haran, because according to this account, he's departing from Haran in the north. And we're not going to get into this today, but there is a discrepancy with where Abraham was called out of. Some say it's Haran, and some say it's somewhere else. And this becomes a problem also with land grant arguments, because there's this sticky little law about in the ancient Near East, and I'll just put a pin in this. We'll get back to this later with the argument over where this all is and why that's important. But we need a little more background first. They're constantly citing his age and what the rest of the family is doing. Like, is his dad dead? Is his dad alive when he leaves his original family clan location? And the reason for that is in the ancient Near East, the law is customary that if your patriarchal father is still alive, the new land that you're establishing still goes back through the patriarchal lineage. Does that make sense? So they're trying to get around the dates here. And in some accounts, you'll see as soon as Abraham's father died, he left and went and settled a new place. So it's all his. And this just comes into removing the boundary stone, land claims, and all those sort of things, which is why they're really particular about where he left from and what age he was when he left. So just put a pin in all that. But this one says he left from Haran. Okay. All right. He was 75 when he departed from Haran. Okay. And Abram took Sarah and Lot his brothers and all their possessions they had gathered and the people that they had acquired in Haran, and they set out to go to the land of Canaan. And when they came, Abraham passed through the land to the place at Shechem. Put a big old pin in Shechem. It's the first place he lands. Okay. This is also the place that the Levites and Simeon, Levi and Simeon, the patriarchs, Levi and Simeon, took their dudes and slaughtered all the people. And that was what was responsible for Jacob having to flee and go someplace else. So the question becomes, if the first place that Abraham settled and built an altar here at Shechem, why in the world were Levi, and Simeon slaughtering people on the land of the ancestors and the patriarchs. Why is that? Why would they do that? That's a problem. Forcing Jacob out of that land. That becomes a big old problem. So let's go ahead and put a pin in Shechem, okay, and remember the massacre in Shechem. So he built there in Shechem an altar to the Lord, who had appeared to him. From there, he moved to the hill country on the east of Bethel. So here we are back in Bethel. We remember that from the Ephraim series, right? And there he built an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. Then he moved on, going south towards the Negev. Then we have this odd thing where he shows up in Egypt, and there's this whole thing about the Pharaoh and his wife Sarah, and all this stuff starts happening here with Pharaoh and Sarah, which is important, but we're going to go ahead and put a pin in this one, okay? We're going to get back to this one later with good old Sarah and her womb. All right. The next we're going to go, let's go back here and share this tab instead. So in this first interaction, we've got this open air migration order, supposedly from Haram, supposedly into Shechem and Bethel. This is a relational kinsman, profile A, because it's non-transactional. Personal protection, right? There's no strings attached. Also, this is Genesis 12, 6 through 7. It continues on. Again, we have the open air land grant. It's this metaphorical look at the stars and your descendants will be blessed. It's unmediated promise, no priestly tax grid or flesh cutting with this covenant. But then we're going to move to Genesis 13. And something really weird happens because remember, he went Shechem, Bethel, south through the Negev desert, ends up in Egypt, has kind of a showdown with the Pharaoh, and then immediately turns right back around and goes all the way back up from Egypt into the Negev, into Bethel, into Shechem. He's sort of retracing his steps, but this time, somehow, he ends up in Hebron, which is back down in the south again. So what you're going to see in this next interaction, Genesis 13, is this southern rezoning batch, okay? We meet God twice in 12, and now we're going into 13. This rezoning. So let's go over here and share this tab instead and see what happens. So Abraham went up from Egypt, and they went into the Negev. And Abraham was very rich. Of course, the money's come into play here in livestock, silver, gold. He journeyed from the Negev as far as Bethel to the place where his tent had been at the beginning. Well, the beginning was Shechem. I'm sorry, it wasn't Bethel, it was Shechem. Bethel was the second place. And he called upon the name of the Lord. And now this is where it's going to go through this whole long thing about Lot and Abram separating, right? And Lot runs off to the Jordan Valley into Sodom and Gomorrah. There's not enough room for them all to graze together. We mentioned this briefly in the similar account over in Genesis 15 that we have audited previously, okay? The Lord said to Abram after Lot separated, lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, north, south, east, and west. All the land you see I'll give to you and your offspring forever. I'll make your offspring as the dust of the earth. So if no one can count the dust of the earth, your offspring also cannot be counted. Walk through the length and breadth of the land, for I will give it to you. So this is a generalized, touchy-feely, cushy profile of the same one that we identified in Genesis 12 and Genesis 15, only verses 1 through 6 over in Genesis 15 that we already did. But here's what Genesis 13 does differently. He's going backwards. Instead of Shechem to Bethel to Egypt, he's going Egypt to Bethel, and then he turns around. He turns right around. He doesn't make it up to Shechem. Funny enough. He walks down to Hebron, to the Oaks, not to Shechem. And there he built an altar to the Lord, because we got to work Hebron in. We got to work Hebron in. And this right here, the difference between 12 and 13, it's almost like a mirror. If you could imagine like a perfect reflection, a V shape. He's going down to the south into Egypt, and then turns right around, goes back up, makes half a trip, mirroring his last route, and then goes down to Hebron, because we got to suck Hebron into this. And you are going to see a Hebron versus Shechem argument about where the patriarchs are actually buried and where that land where he talked to God actually was. So what this is a southern rezoning patch. It is a scribal patch that comes in, and they are rezoning him for the Judean scribes to get him in the south. Okay? It's like this artificial corporate merger patch of land, and it copy and pastes the exact profile of David's God and that same promise that we've heard repeated over and over and over again. But it alters the map to force Abraham straight down into Judah territory, which is Hebron, which is an important city. And this is a place of the patriarchs. They're all buried there. Well, we have an argument about that. Just saying. This is where Stephen says in his speech, excuse me, but the patriarchs are buried in Shechem. Uh-oh. And all the preachers are like, well, Stephen didn't know. Stephen was a Hellenist. Stephen doesn't know what he's talking about. He must have made a mistake. No. What Stephen's doing is going through these 4 different arguments where he's using their corrupted stories and corrupted texts against them to prove his point. So Stephen is referring to the northern tradition, not the scribal patch, where they absorbed the entire South and it's just all ours now. Remember, the Edomites came in and suddenly they own Hebron. So he's saying, no, it wasn't Hebron, it was Shechem to begin with. So that's where this whole argument is coming from, and we'll see that in this Acts debate that we will touch and go a bit deeper another time. But just know, all of this land moving with Abraham is a big problem and a big contradiction, and we'll dig that out another time. Moving right along to Genesis 14, where we've got our feudal merger going on here. 14. All right. Now, we're going through, and he's got this battle with the king of Elam going on and some other folks, but he's in this battle and he wins. So he returns from this, defeating this guy and these kings who were with him. But this is the part that I really want to zone in on here, okay? Not only does the king of Sodom come out to meet him in the valley, but Melchizedek, the king of Salem, which is Jerusalem, before it was Jerusalem, which is the Jebusite stronghold that worships El Elyon. That Melchizedek, that Salem, that El Elyon, the Jebusite king. He brings out bread and wine, and he was a priest of God Most High. Well, let's jump down here. Let's just jump down here and see what that means. Oh, he doesn't tell us. Okay, it says, or creator. Actually, if we go over here, I think I'm going to go to, I think they actually didn't lie this time. They actually did the names of God, and I want to show you this because it's really funny. Sometimes they tell on themselves. Oh, there it is, right there. Look at that. He was a priest of El Elyon. There it is. And he blessed Abram and said, blessed is Abram by El Elyon, the maker of heaven and earth, the king of the pantheon. The king of Sodom said to Abram,
Give me the people, and you can keep everything else. Yep. So we've got an alien god here, who is our corporate landlord. Okay, first landlord, that's profile B. This is brokered by a city-state king priest Melchizedek, who's demanding immediate 10% tithe and a tribute tax on all of his assets. Now, if you remember, in Genesis 15, 1 through 6, we've already audited this, right? This was the original voice that got hijacked later, right? This is our relational kinsman. It was credited to him as righteousness. Case closed. That's it. The contract's done. And then in verse 7, we have the blood cut takeover, right? And this is acting like profile E, which is Kos, the desert blood syndicate. And we're going to talk about Kos and the Biles. I want you to remember back here, let's share this tab instead. We went ahead and looked at this entity with that deep sleep and the darkness and the janky birds. And notice your offspring will be sojourners in a land that's not theirs, and will be servants there and afflicted for 400 years. So we're putting them into servitude in a different land. And they're going to come out with loot. That's what they're going to do. Okay. They're going to come out with loot. He's also got all of these sacrifices going on, and the birds of prey come down. All this is happening. This is where he kind of walks through the butchered animals, right? And does that whole giant ritual that we were talking about before. And we said, that sounds like a Baal, right? Maybe Baal Hadad followed him down from the north, but here's the interesting thing. Up here, the last time we read it, he was coming from the north, right? His heir in Damascus. In the account we just read a few moments ago, he was coming down from Haran, which is also in the north. Remember that? But somehow, down here, the second voice says, I'm the Lord who brought you out from Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to possess. Whoa. Ur of the Chaldeans? First of all, the Chaldeans were not in existence until the Persian rewrite. Then they're in existence. But back in Abraham's day, there was no Ur of the Chaldeans that existed. So there's another point for the second voice protocol. And we know this is sort of a Baal type thing. But when you look a little closer at the ritual stuff, we start to get a mixed profile, which also indicates post-Persia. So not only do we have this Ur, which happens to be in southern Iraq, which is Babylon, which is nowhere near the north, near Turkey, okay? So now we're basically taking him out of Babylon rather than the Syrian Damascus route. Sounds coincidental that this kind of comes in after Babylon, just saying. We kind of identified him as this Baal because he's coming down from the north, right? But when we put him in Babylon coming up from the south, in the rewrite, you'll see this sort of conglomerate god, okay? This god's dropping a thick and dreadful darkness, demands hacked animal blood, introduces a 400-year slavery death penalty, and manifests slicing through the meat. And remember, Kos is our metallurgy, our volcanic, our volatile god of metallurgy and stoking fires. So here in Genesis 15, it looks a little like El Shaddai. It looks a little like the Kos Yahweh. It looks a little like Baal Hadad because it's a post-Persian El family Yahweh merger god, that monster that was developed in the Persian Empire when they sort of merged everything. The Yahwehs, the Baals, the El Shaddais, they all become Lord or quote unquote Yahweh. That's why this janky god sort of has a mixed profile here. Now we're going to have our flesh branding god. Let's go move up to 17. You've got a little bit of problem here in 17. This is the covenant of circumcision. At the beginning, it doesn't sound so bad. I'm God Almighty, walk before me, be blameless. I'll make a covenant between me and you. Haven't we already made these covenants? Like, why do we keep making more covenants? Well, we keep making more covenants because the scribes keep having to go in and jankifying the covenant, right? And turning it towards them and their gods, land of your sojournings. We're doing a whole nother land deal now. As for you, you shall keep my covenant. Here's the quid pro quo coming up. You and your offspring throughout their generations. Between you and me and your offspring after you, every male among you shall be circumcised. You shall be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskins, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and you. Not a circumcision of the heart, a circumcision of the skin. He who is 8 days old shall be circumcised, in every male throughout your generations, whether born in your house or bought with your money from any foreigner. Both he who is born in your house and he who is brought in with your money shall surely be circumcised. So shall my covenant be in your flesh, an everlasting covenant. Any uncircumcised male who is not circumcised in the flesh, not in the heart, in the flesh, shall be cut off from his people, because he's broken my covenant. And we continue. And God said to Abraham, as for Sarah, your wife, we're going to change her name. I'm going to bless her, and I will give you a son by her. She shall become nations, kings of peoples shall come from her. Abraham fell on his face and laughed and said to himself, shall a child be born to a man who's 100 years old? Shall Sarah bear a child? And Abraham said to God, oh, that Ishmael might live before you. And God said, no, Sarah shall bear you a son, and you shall call him Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him. And then we go on and we talk about Ishmael. Okay. And he goes back and he circumcises everybody. Put a pin in the circumcision part. That's important. We've got two purposes for the circumcision thing here in the ancient Near East. We haven't talked about those yet, but we will when we do a little deeper dive on this. So here we've got profile D. This is El Shaddai. This is the repo man. He catches Abraham when he's 99 and weak, demands flawless compliance, and enforces immediate, bloody corporate branding onto the flesh to lock the lineage, and promises to open Sarah's womb. That is a telltale El Shaddai move, because El Shaddai is the L of the fruitful womb. That becomes a problem right there. Now we're going to move to 18:1 to 15, and we're going to look at Sarah's laughter and see how this God reacts to Sarah's laughter. The Lord appeared to him by the oaks as he sat at the door of the tent in the heat of the day. He lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, there were 3 men standing in front of him. Now, somehow these 3 men turn into God and 2 angels. Okay, and we're not going there. We're not going there with the apologists argument right now, but we've got 3 men becoming 1. And he ran to the tent door, and he bowed to the earth and said, I have found favor in your sight. Do not pass by your servant. And he feeds the guys, and he sends Sarah in to get food and water and make them some cakes. And they get curds and milk, and they make a calf that he prepared, and they have a big old barbecue together. They said, "Where's Sarah?" And Abraham says, "Oh, she's in the tent, like a good woman in there cooking the cakes." The Lord said, "The Lord now, not the men, the Lord. I will surely return to you this time next year. Sarah, your wife, shall have a son." Now, Sarah was listening at the door, and Abraham and Sarah were old. The way of women had ceased to be with Sarah. So she laughed to herself, saying, "I'm worn out, and my Lord is old. Shall I have pleasure?" My Lord meaning Abraham. Abraham's old. What pleasure am I going to have? And the Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Shall I bear a child now that I'm old?' Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time, I will return to you this time next year, and Sarah will have a son." But Sarah denied laughing, saying, "I didn't laugh," because she was afraid. And God said, "No, you did laugh." This entity does not have a very good sense of humor with Sarah and her laughing. He doesn't like it. Sarah denied it, saying, "I didn't laugh," because she was afraid. And the Lord said, "No. Oh, you laughed." And then the three quote unquote men got up from there, looked towards Sodom, and Abraham walked with them. And now we have the Lord arguing with Abraham about what to do with Sodom and Gomorrah. And we're going to put a pin in that one. Okay, we're going to put a pin in that for now. We'll come back to the Sodom and Gomorrah scene. But for right now, I just want to look at Sarah's laughter and put a pin in Sodom and Gomorrah, because I don't want to take away from that scene. I want to take away from that scene when we get to Genesis 22. So we've just met our womb opening God, who's not very happy with Sarah for laughing. Okay. We've also got our God who shared a meal under a tree. So we're going to leave it up to you. We report, you decide if you think it's the same God or not, or if it's another hijack happening here. Okay. But we're going to move and see what happens to good old Isaac here. So now, after these things, and this is where we stop and go, wait a minute, after what things? What just happened? Well, we don't know. So we can't start in Genesis 22 because we got to find out what things. So we're going to go back to Genesis 21. We're going to scroll down, and we've got a covenant with Abimelech. So we've got Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his army, said to Abraham, "God's with you in everything you do. So swear to me here, by God, that you will not deal unfairly with me or with my son or my descendants. I've treated you with kindness. You shall do the same to me and to the land in which you've temporarily lived." And Abraham said, "I swear, I'm not going to come against your people." Abraham complained to Abimelech about a well of water, which the servants of Abimelech had seized from him. And Abimelech said, "I don't know who did this." So Abraham's making a peace treaty over a well that he dug on Abimelech's land. Okay, this is a land treaty going on here. And Abimelech said, "I don't know who did this. Indeed, you didn't tell me, and I didn't hear of it until today. Like, I don't know what's going on." So Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave them to Abimelech. And the two men made a covenant, a binding agreement between them. And Abraham set apart 7 lambs. There's that 7, that priesthood 7. And Abraham said, You are to accept these 7 lambs as a witness that I dug this well. For that place was called Beersheba, the well of oath, or the well of the 7, because there the 2 of them swore an oath. So they made a covenant, and then Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his army, got up and returned to the land of the Philistines. And Abraham planted a tree at Beersheba, and there he called on the name of the Lord in prayer, the eternal God. And Abraham lived as a resident alien in the land of Philistines for many days. Let's be good Bible readers and look up E. The eternal God. What is the name that they gave it in the book? Well, it's El Olam. Surprise, surprise. The God of the landlord God, El Elyon.
Welcome to the jungle. It's worse here every day. The jungle where it's playing.
So after these things, after he made a deal with the guy over the land and the water and prayed to El Olam, or El Elyon, the Jebusite god, Melchizedek's god. After that, after these things, God tested the faith. That same God who he was just talking to about the land deal tested the faith of Abraham and said, Abraham, and he answered, here I am. And El Elyon, or El Olam, said, take your son, your only son of that promise. Remember that promise that you made about the son with the womb opening God, El Shaddai, that one you love. Yeah, go to the region of Moriah. An offering there is a burnt offering, one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. So Abraham got up early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him and his son Isaac, and he split the wood for the burnt offering. Then he got up and went to the place of which God had told him. On the 3rd day, he looked up and saw the place in the distance. Said to his servant, settle down and stay here. The young man and I will go and worship El Elyon, and we will come back to you. Abraham took the wood and laid it on the shoulders of Isaac his son. And he took the fire pot and the sacrificial knife, and the 2 of them walked together. And Isaac said, my father, look at the fire and the wood, but where's the lamb, Dad? Where's the lamb? And Abraham said, my son, God will provide for himself a lamb for the burnt offering. So the 2 walked on together. And when they came to the place which God had told him, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood and bound Isaac his son and placed him on the altar. And Abraham reached out and took his knife to kill his son for El Elyon. Now, a lot of apologetic scholars and seminary scholars will argue and try to do some convoluted story about how this is David's God testing him. But we know from James, interestingly, put a pin in James, because right before James retells this story, okay, in his faith versus works speech, we'll get to that. He says something really interesting on that page in James 2. He says, make no mistake. God cannot be tested, nor does he test. And then he goes on oddly and tells the story of Abraham sacrificing Isaac. It's like, wait, what are you talking about, James? What are you doing? It makes more sense when you start to understand how Jesus, James, Stephen are always using their narratives against them to catch them in a catch-22. Put a pin in that. We'll get back to that. We'll get back to James. But right here, the preacher's like, well, God was testing him to, kill his son. Well, who is the God that claims firstborn sons in land deals? Another problem. Now, supposedly, I'm going to say, Allegedly, put a pin in that word, allegedly, the angel of the Lord. Now we've got an angel of the Lord showing up. Let's go down and see what that means. See note 16:7. Okay. Called to Abraham from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he answered, Here I am. Do not reach out with the knife in your hand against the boy. Do nothing to harm him. For now I know that you fear God, since you've not withheld from me your son, your only son of the promise. Notice they keep referring back to the son of the promise. And Abraham looked up and glanced around, and there was a ram caught in the thicket, and we've all heard the ram story, and he offered up the ram instead of his son. And he named that place, the Lord will provide. And the angel of the Lord called to Abraham from heaven a second time and said, I've sworn an oath that since you've done this and have not withheld your son, indeed I will bless you and I will multiply your descendants like the stars of the heavens. Here we go back to the same promise again. Through your seed all nations shall be blessed, because you've heard and obeyed my voice. And then we have line 19. But then Abraham returned to his servants, and they got up and went with him to Beersheba. Where's Isaac? Just asking. If we have this miraculous ram intervention, where's Isaac? Why is Abraham returning to his servants alone? Just asking. Why is it just that the servants got up and went with him to Beersheba? Where's Isaac? Did we leave him there? There's a midrash, Talmudic text that says Isaac was indeed sacrificed on this mountain, and scholars tend to agree. Apologist scholars will say, no, that's not true. And also, these gods didn't demand child sacrifice. It was only in desperate situations. They just did it when they were really desperate, like for war or imminent danger. But that story doesn't even hold up with Abraham, because this is just like a random Tuesday. Okay, this is a random Tuesday sacrifice. He didn't argue. He didn't debate with God. He actually negotiated more with the other God about Sodom and Gomorrah than he negotiated with this God about sacrificing his own son. So he's pleading with one God to save Sodom and Gomorrah, but he's not pleading with this God about his son after he does the land deal and takes over a portion of the land with Abimelech, which is interesting to say the least. And now Isaac is actually not coming down off the mountain at all. And right after we see Isaac not returning from the mountain, we've got this whole random genealogy just thrown in. And Bethuel became the father of all Rebekah. They actually sent someone out to get Rebekah and bring her back. So there is an ancient tradition that states Isaac was sacrificed. But in that case, the lineage isn't pure through Isaac, and that's a whole other story. Put a pin in that one. So whether you want to believe that Isaac was sacrificed or not, we tend to think he was over here. And where does Jacob come from? Well, Jacob comes from Rebekah and Abraham. And the entity that promised to open the womb of Sarah, then took that firstborn son of Sarah because she laughed at him. And Abraham tried to make a land deal on his own and broker a land deal without going through the central bank. You can't do that, Abraham. You can't do that. You can't make deals, land deals, bypassing the central bank because they will demand the firstborn son. That's how it rolls. So let's go back here and share this tab instead. So this looks like profile B. This is El Elyon with the Moloch, or the passing through the fire, the act of sacrifice via the corporate Elohim board of directors. Because, you know, El Elyon doesn't get his own hands dirty. So he'll send his messengers down. This is a depersonalized brokered property audit at a mountain right next to Jerusalem. The local agricultural high god owned the fertility of the soil and the fertility of the womb. The firstborn son was not a gift of worship. It was a literal property tribute owed to the landlord to keep the family line fertile. So this is that random Tuesday. The entity demanding Isaac is Ha Elohim, or the El God. And Abraham doesn't argue, because in ancient Near East context, this is just a routine, expected, bureaucratic foreclosure on the firstborn son. Now we want to go back and share this tab instead, because remember when the angel of the Lord visited and it said go back to 16:7. Well, we're going to go here and read that note. Remember the angel of the Lord came. What did he say? Let's go back and remind ourselves what this angel of the Lord said in the offering of Isaac seen. Let's find here we go. The angel of the Lord called him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And the Lord said, do not reach out with the knife in your hand, do nothing to him, since you've not withheld from me your son. The angel of the Lord also called to Abraham a second time and said, I've sworn an oath that since you've done this, I will greatly bless you and multiply your and then he repeats the blessing. So this is what's happening with the angel of the Lord. It said, go back to note 16:7. So let's go back to 16 and look at 16:7. The first time this angel of the Lord shows up, which is right here. The angel of the Lord found her by a spring in the wilderness on the way to Egypt. And he said, Hagar, Sarah's maid, where'd you come from and where are you going? And she said, I'm running away from my mistress Sarah. And the angel of the Lord said to her, go back and submit to her authority. Then the angel of the Lord said to her, I will multiply your descendants so there'll be too many to count. Okay? So who is this angel of the Lord? This is the first occurrence of the angel of the Lord, Yahweh, in Scripture. Oh, Yahweh's the angel of the Lord now. The Hebrew word for angel means messenger. An angel of God is a special messenger who speaks for and is closely identified with him. Context determines whether the messenger is angel or human. The same is true for the Greek. The word angel is an English form of the Greek angelos. Angel of the Lord can be a special case, however. Many biblical scholars believe this angel is a physical manifestation of God. The angel of the Lord may be the pre-incarnate Christ, the Son of God, depending on the context, of course. Sure it was. Sure it was. I don't know about that, scholars. I don't know about that, scholars. So when they're like, oh no, if there was child sacrifice, it was just in really desperate times. Well, what Abraham was just digging a well, dude, on a random Tuesday. He didn't fight at all. So this brings us to the scribing of Moloch. Now we've got our Harvard scholar, John Levinson, who we talked about a little bit earlier. We mentioned him. And he shows that the firstborn child tax was a literal original tax of the Levant. And back to our Princeton scholar, Mark Smith, shows that Moloch was never an independent god. It's a Punic and Phoenician ritual noun, meaning child sacrifice. The institutional scribes personalized this noun and made it into a proper name, into a fake foreign monster called Moloch or Molech, to hide the fact that their own centralized high god profile of El with the label Yahweh on it was actually the one demanding the blood tax.
When you're high, you never, ever wanna go down. Suck down, suck down.
So this is a proper name rebranding, and it can be spelled M-O-L-E or M-O-L-O. But in the 1930s, Otto Eisfelt discovered inscriptions in Carthage showing the word MLK with that Phoenician writing. Remember that? Those consonants. And it was used as a noun meaning a human sacrifice or the act or vow of human sacrifice. So academics are throwing this big party, and they ran to the cameras and they're like, see, it was just a type of sacrifice. The Israelites were just getting confused by this quote unquote foreign Phoenician ritual vocabulary. No, we've already proved that the Phoenician vocabulary was the same darn thing, right? It was the same thing. They weren't confused. Look at the data scar. The consonants are MLK, which is the exact root for Melech, meaning king. So centuries after the fact, those Masoretic scribes, those make up the vowel people, the vowel putter-inners, went into the scrolls and changed the vowels of Melech, king, to match the vowels of the word Bosheth, which is shame, or Bosheth. They purposefully invented the artificial word Molech to act as a theological blank screen. There's this cartoonish pagan demon character which distracts the reader from understanding that the original pre-redacted Phoenician lettered text was talking about sacrificing children to the king, the Melech, the Yahweh. They don't want you to know that. So they made up a demon instead. They made it into a name. And we've got some unerasable receipts in both Micah and Jeremiah. The prophets themselves state that the population of Israel was slaughtering their children directly in the name of the state deity, the state from Solomon's deity, believing it was a mandatory legal requirement. Micah says, "With what shall I come before the Most High El Elyon? Shall I offer my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul?" Micah doesn't say, should I go worship a foreign deity named Moloch? He asks if the El Elyon Sky Central Banking Cartel is the one demanding his kid's throat. Jeremiah, he's standing in the valley of Hinnom and screams the ultimate internal whistleblower prophet scream. And he says they built the high places of Topheth to burn their sons and daughters with the fire, something I did not command, nor did it ever enter my mind. That's David's God. Saying, this isn't me. This is not something I commanded, nor did it ever enter my mind. Why would the sovereign God of David and Jesus need to yell, hey guys, I never commanded you to burn your babies. It never even crossed my mind. Why would he need to say that? You only issue a public denial through the prophets if the people are actively running around, waving a contract with your name on it that you didn't sign, claiming that you did command it. The Judean population was looking right at Exodus 22. The firstborn of your sons you shall give to me. They were looking at the Genesis 22. They believed the El Elyon and Q's Melech extraction cartel required child tribute to secure their presence on the land. Jeremiah was screaming that it's the wrong contract. It's been completely hijacked by identity thieving. Solomonic squatters is what that is. And we talked about that scholar way at the beginning, who breaks down Ezekiel 20 to the minutia. And this is a smoking gun, where the text openly confesses to the crime, where the entity describes how it intentionally weaponized these janky child-eating contracts to break the population as a punishment for their unauthorized corporate deal-making, like Abraham did. He tried to make a deal off the books directly. So they also gave them over to statutes that were not good and laws by which they could not live. I defiled them through their own gifts, the sacrifice of every firstborn, that I might fill them with horror, so they would know that I am the Lord. That's not David and Jesus is God speaking right there. This is the ultimate confession and the smoking gun. The patriarchs were being manipulated by other gods in the ancient Near East to have that land. That land, according to those gods, requires blood, and a lot of it. I would question if they're still in that contract today. So this is the raw data sheet that our framework is tracking. The laws by which they could not live. This is the Hannibal Lecter. Kos Baal Peor. That the Levites hijacked in the road trip from hell that was smuggled into the camp to run their firstborn head tax cartel racket. And this is where the Moses, Aaron, Levi stream of hijacked patriarchs comes in. And Stephen's final trap. Look at why Stephen weaves this line by line in Acts 7 when he's quoting Amos. You've taken up the tabernacle of Moloch and the star of your god Remphan. The name Moloch is just the transliteration of Melech and king. So he's standing before the Sanhedrin, exposing their identity theft and their god switching. Stephen's basically saying, you guys think you're serving the true sovereign God of David, but your own edited scrolls admit that your ancestors were carrying around the tent of the king, Moloch, in the desert. You want to hide behind vowel changes and pretend it was a foreign god, but your family has always worshipped the high-altitude child-extracting landlord because the patriarchs made dual covenants, and you guys hijacked it. You went with the hijacked voice, not the original voice. Back to fighting over the jurisdiction of Moses. They're running in multiple jurisdictions. And Jesus has got to foreclose all those contracts and bring all the patriarchs back out from the janky contracts. Resurrection of the true covenant in foreclosure on the janky covenants. That's why he empties Sheol and brings all the patriarchs out. He's foreclosing on the false contracts. And it's no wonder they stoned him. Now do you see? And we'll see Jacob and his dual contracts the next time.